Quoting, I am interested in debating James White on Sola Scriptura because the topic is a fundamental issue with a narrow focus and I have something to say about it. My case involves new arguments that haven't been dealt with in previous debates. They thus have not been tested in debate. I am not interested in debating him on Pope Francis. For a debate to provide more light than heat, it has to be narrowly focused. To be worthwhile, it needs to deal with a fundamental issue rather than a derivative one. A debate on a collection of statements made by Pope Francis would not be narrowly focused and would not deal with a fundamental issue, the real issue being the underlying question of authority. In such a debate, the obvious strategy for White would be 1. Identify a selection of statements on various unrelated topics that will sound bad or that can be made to sound bad to Protestant ears. 2. Turn up the rhetorical heat to make them sound as bad as possible. 3. Run out the clock on your opponent by throwing out so many charges he doesn't have time to respond to them all. 4. Remind the audience that the opponent hasn't responded to every charge you've made or responded to your satisfaction. 5. Declare victory, turning up the heat again for the big ending. That kind of debate is guaranteed to generate heat rather than light, which is why I'm not interested in it. I find it puzzling that White seems so intent on this topic rather than one on a narrowly focused fundamental topic like Sola Scriptura, which he and I have never had a formal debate on. Catholic Answers tried to arrange such a debate for several years and got nowhere. Now Matt Fradd has offered to host it. White has debated numerous other people on this topic, but he seems reluctant to debate me on it. I will leave it to the reader to discern why that might be. All right. Because the topic is a fundamental issue with a narrow focus, and I have something to say about it. Well, congratulations, Jimmy. Since you say my case involves new arguments that haven't been dealt with in previous debates, they thus have not been tested in debate, then I would suggest identifying exactly where you have published these arguments. Or are you just simply saying, well, I'm just going to wait till the debate, and then you just got to respond to him on the fly? I'm sorry, Mr. Akin, but I don't think that you or I are bright enough to come up with something new that hasn't already been discussed about this subject, okay? We've covered this ground before, and I have no problem with debating you on Sola Scriptura. I'm just simply stating it's time for you guys to step up to the bat and defend your positive assertions. You guys are always willing to go on the offensive, but you don't seem to want to defend your side of things. And right now is a unique historical opportunity to defend your claims. So put your arguments out. Publish them. Say, here's my new arguments against Sola Scriptura that no one else has ever thought of before. Will you debate me on it? Be happy to look at them. I can guarantee you they will be a derivative of some other form of argumentation that's been used before. But go ahead and put it out there. But I am not interested in debating him on Pope Francis. For a debate to provide more light than heat, it has to be narrowly focused. Well, okay. Then why has Catholic Answers for years constantly diffused every debate on Sola Scriptura that you've done? You guys haven't followed what you yourself are saying you're supposed to do here. You guys have always been willing to bring in all sorts of other topics into the Sola Scriptura debate, and those other topics, such as the canon, assumed the correctness of the presuppositions that you are now refusing to defend. There's the problem. You want to bring up the issue of canon? Who defines it? If you say, well, you can't define it just using Sola Scriptura, then what you're claiming is, we can. You didn't do that until April of 1546. You want to really get into that? I mean, that's a worthwhile topic. I mean, it would be a really good, worthwhile topic. The canon of Scripture was not known in the Christian church until April of 1546. That's what you believe, is it not? That's, if you need an ecumenical decree, I can show you where Cardinal Jimenez, when he's examining Luther, has published that the apocryphal books are not Scripture. I can show you where popes said the apocryphal books are not Scripture. So that's worth debating. But how about doing it? If you're the one true church, why are you always in a situation of not being willing to defend the positive claims yourself? Over and over and over again. It's, well, Sola Scriptura doesn't work. Sola Scriptura this, Sola Scriptura that. There are assumptions behind that. And those assumptions need to be fleshed out and defended. And we have an opportunity right now in the pontificate of Francis to test what you all have been saying about what Sola Scriptura allegedly fails to be able to do in light of Pope Francis. The clarity that Pope Francis will bring to biblical interpretation, right? Why not? Now is the time to do it. So, for a debate to provide more light than heat, it has to be narrowly focused. You need to have a specific thesis topic. There's no question about it. That's true. That's the same with whether it's Sola Scriptura, justification by faith, the Marian dogmas, canonicity of the Apocrypha, whatever. To be worthwhile, it needs to deal with a fundamental issue rather than a derivative one. Okay? Then are you saying that whether Pope Francis is the infallible vicar of Christ on earth today is a derivative rather than a fundamental issue? Because remember, when I read from Satis Cognitum, or was that, the Second Vatican Council, and all this teaching about the institution, the perpetuity, the force and reason for the sacred primacy of the Roman pontiff, and his infallible teaching authority, this sacred synod again proposes to be firmly believed by all the faithful. They're the ones that linked all this stuff together. This is your church speaking. These are your dogmatic canons and decrees. These are your anathemas, not mine. And they link these things together. You wanted to break them apart. Why? Well, I know why. Because right now, it is painfully obvious that papacy doesn't work. Because the Pope's a human being. And this Pope has a different worldview that fundamentally alters the nature of the faith as he confesses it. And that's the difference between Sola Scriptura and the Roman system. My scriptures don't change. Your popes do. You can't change the worldview. And look what's happening right now. And you all agree with us on this. This is where it must bug you. But you all agree with you and I, Jimmy Akin, Patrick Madrid, Trent Horn. I watch your tweets. And you see what woke justice is about. You see how they're changing the meaning of words, the attack on language. You see what's coming. You agree with us. This is not good stuff. And you see what it would mean to the interpretation of your own history and your own theology. There's the point. When someone tries to change the worldview of Scripture, they can't do it without altering the words, because the words have meaning. As long as you continue to utilize meaningful standards of human communication, this is a verb, that's a noun, this is what they mean, then the Scriptures are going to continue to mean what the Scriptures have always said from the start. That's not the same with the papacy. That's not the same with the Pope. And once you give the Pope and the papacy the primary capacity to interpret Scripture, you no longer have an unchanging standard. And Pope Francis proves it. And what you're probably staying awake at night worrying about is that the successor of Francis may prove it with even greater clarity. So, a debate on a collection of statements made by Pope Francis would not be narrowly focused and would not deal with a fundamental issue, the real issue being the underlying question of authority. How do you even begin to define the underlying question of authority when you ignore your current living Pope? He is the expression of it. I'll never forget. I forget what year it was. It's probably on a hard drive somewhere around here, but I remember very, very clearly pointing out a contradiction. This was back during John Paul II. A contradiction between what John Paul II had said and a previous Bishop of Rome had said. And Robert Sungenis wrote to me and said, your problem, James, is that you think you can interpret church history. The only people who can interpret church history is the church, headed by the Pope. Oh, think about what that means. So all Francis has to do is to interpret everybody who's come before him as saying, if you baptize your kids, you can be an atheist and go to heaven. And all of a sudden, that's now apostolic truth? You know that doesn't work, and I know that doesn't work. And the worldview that allows Francis to look at the tradition primarily delivered to him in the South American church and interpret it the way he's interpreting it, and then acting upon that in putting people in positions of authority, results in the papacy teaching something differently now than it did in the past. The concept of infallible teaching authority has to have meaning, or your claims and my claims are empty. They're empty. We cannot compromise at this point. Words have to continue to have meaning. You're trying to fight that battle. We're fighting that battle. But that must mean that that concept comes into our battle as well. So I'm not going to go through all these points again, other than him saying, well, this is what I expect White would do. Thank you very much. I mean, this is just basically saying, run out the clock, rhetorical heat, blah, 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 blah. This is sort of like saying, I, Jimmy Akin, am the debater who would never do things like this, but that James White guy. I think I've done a few more than you have, Jimmy. And I'll leave it up to the audience to look at. I'll tell you what. Let's do this. Pick 5 Jimmy Akin debates. Now, Jimmy Akin and I have debated. It was only on radio. And he lost that debate. He's admitted he lost that debate. He was wrong. I was on John 6. But pick 5 Jimmy Akin debates. Take my 5 debates with Mitch Pacwa. Compare them. See if any of these rather subtle allegations found here have any foundation whatsoever. They don't. They don't. So that kind of debate is guaranteed to generate heat rather than light, which is why I'm not interested in it. Well, of course, he presents this, he's going to misbehave, he's not going to debate correctly, type thing. I'm simply saying, look, I claim that Scripture, since it is theopneustos, admits of no higher authority in the Christian church. You claim that Scripture needs the structure of the Roman Catholic Church, and specifically the teaching, office, and authority of the Bishop of Rome. You have a Bishop of Rome, his name's Francis. Let's debate whether he is, in fact, the infallible vicar of Christ on earth with sole authority to interpret the Scriptures. Not sole as in solo. I realize that he has the magisterium and stuff like that, but the buck stops there. You guys had your shot at conciliarism, the Council of Pisa, and Constance, and chose not to go that direction. So you're stuck with what you got. No changing it now. Well, unless Francis decides to. I don't know. I suppose there's some way around it. Anyway, really quickly, I find it puzzling that White seems so intent on this topic, rather than one on a narrowly focused fundamental topic like sola scriptura. Mr. Akin, the papacy is central to the authority claims of the Roman Catholic Church. And we live in a day where your Pope is destroying the consistency of your ultimate epistemological claims. And you know, as well as I do, that there are a bunch of people in your communion who are using phrases like red-pilled, about Pope Francis. They see it too. There are prelates in your church that see it too. I'm not just making... This shouldn't be puzzling to you, Jimmy. It's not puzzling to you, is it? No, it's not puzzling. Catholic Answers tried to arrange such a debate for several years and got nowhere. Well, yeah, you were supposed to do it and you never would. We came close once, but what we were told was you did not want to travel. So we did other things. I could find out. I bet you I could find out from Chris exactly what that was, when that was, and everything else. But so finally, White has debated numerous other people on this topic, but he seems reluctant to debate me on it. That's just not true. I do not believe you have anything new. I'm sorry. I do not believe that you're brighter than all the previous defenders of the Roman Catholic Church. Because if I were to say, I've got new stuff that no one ever thought of, I'd be saying I'm brighter than all the people who wrote the classic works, George Salmon and Good and all the others that wrote such tremendous works in defense of the Reformation, Francis Turretin. I ain't going to make that claim. If you're making that claim for your side, I leave that to your side to deal with. But what I am saying is it's time for you all to step up to the plate. You've been dodging this all along. I was supposed to debate Tim Staples on this in Sydney, Australia last year. They canceled it. It was set up. And then they said, no. We had the place set up. Our side was ready. The other side was ready. And you all said no. I don't know why. Because he still came. He and I were speaking within a few miles of each other on the same day in Sydney, Australia last year. Check with Tim. He'll tell you. Should tell you anyways. So here's my response to Jimmy Akin. I think I've made a very strong case that we live at a point in time right now where there needs to be a clear discussion of the positive claims that Rome makes concerning the necessity of the papacy, and not just the papacy as some nebulous, unidentifiable, foggy chimera, but you have a pope. And that pope has a worldview. And he is using that worldview to choose cardinals and bishops, scholars on the Pontifical Biblical Commission that will influence the teaching in Roman Catholic schools for decades. You know this to be true. This needs to be debated. And if you're going to debate sola scriptura, then both ultimate claims of epistemological authority must be on the table. It is time for Roman Catholic apologists to stand up to their own claims. We've been doing it all along. I've debated this subject far more often than you have, Mr. Akin. You and I engaged in discussion of it on the Bible Answer Man broadcast. So let's not play the game with seems reluctant to debate me on it. You seem to forget that we've been doing this for quite some time. Quite some time. And the documentation is still out there and available for all to see.